If you're already like the accessibility guru of your company, I probably won't teach you much, but otherwise, please bear with me. First of all, blind persons go on the web. They do, and if we do a job well, they will have a perfect experience just like us. They will use a screen reader, so it's different, but it should work. And maybe they're not completely blind, but they just have a really bad eyesight, and they're going to zoom in to the maximum. But that shouldn't stop them from having a perfect experience on your website, even if it's different. Then deaf persons also go on the web. And if we do a job well, just like today we have the luck to have captions, they should be able to enjoy all the same YouTube videos, all the same news, everything. And finally, persons with a moderate disability also go on the web. And maybe they're going to need very big clicking targets because otherwise they won't manage to click. Maybe they need to use only a keyboard, or they will have only one button to go through everything. But it should work. And do you know who else needs keyboard interactions? Someone who has just broken their arm. Imagine you break your arm. Does that mean that for the next 2 months, you just stop going on the internet? That can't work. Or someone, hello, Magic Mouse users. If your mouse is out of battery, does that mean that you just don't work for the whole morning? That can't work. Or who else needs subtitles besides persons who are deaf? Well, someone who has just moved to a new country and doesn't speak the language, or just us right now. For me, yesterday, it was really helpful as a non-native speaker to see subtitles of the speakers. And someone who's in the metro and who doesn't have headphones. Wouldn't it be awesome if all those persons who don't have headphones had subtitles and didn't need to put the sound on their phone in the metro? And finally, do you know who else needs clear clicking targets? Someone who's just plain busy and who really doesn't care about your super fancy UX. They just want to get the stuff done. And if they don't understand how to do it, if it's too complicated, they'll just go somewhere else. So now, what about JavaScript and all that? Usually, JavaScript has a really bad role in accessibility. You can do tons of horrible stuff. For example, you could create a carousel with images that are spinning, 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 and you can't stop them. Or you can make a parallax effect. That looks very fancy, right? But if every time you scroll a tiny bit, the screen completely changes, well, that's really unsettling. You need to be able to turn it off. Another horrible thing you can do with JavaScript is overriding HTML elements. So this is the amount of code you need if you use a button HTML to activate it. If you want to redo everything by yourself using a div, this is what you're going to need at the minimum. And I think we can guarantee that you will forget most of it, so just don't. So when you see that, my first reflex is always, OK, I want to stick to HTML. Can't do anything wrong if you use the proper HTML. Then obviously, you're going to need some CSS. Otherwise, your design team, they won't like it. But we do really need JavaScript, right? There's a bunch of stuff that we can't do without it. So for today, I will assume that you're an expert in HTML. You're already a semantic HTML expert. No problem. I won't teach you anything about it. I will assume that you can't do anything wrong with CSS. You know everything about color contrast, everything. And we'll talk only about the JavaScript code. So demo time. I hope it will work. So I call this example your standard navigation menu. It's accessible. It's not great, but it works. So that's a demo website. It's on garance.dev/basic. As you can see on the top right, I have 2 top-level navigation links for Jean Audubon and Anselmus de Boot. So they're naturalists. They do bird paintings like this one here. And let's see, focus on the bottom left. There will be the keys that I use on the keyboard. There, so I start on the top of the page. I press Tab. I enter in the menu. So as you can see, I see the whole list, and I can tab through each individual link. It's slow to go through everything, but it works. And when I reach the end, I tab again. I get to the boat. And again, I can tab through each individual link. It's really slow. but it works. And then I tab again, and finally I reach the main content. And I can tab back, get back into my component, and do the same thing all over again. So that works great, right? With a keyboard user, no problem, it works. I will now show you the structure of it, because the accessible version has exactly the same structure. So I have a menu bar. This is my top-level element. It contains all those top-level links. Then I have a menu bar item. So this is each individual link that are top-level. Then let's skip one, and I have a pop-up menu. So this is the hidden menu that arrives when I tab in. And it's the list of all those individual links. And finally, I have my menu items, which are each individual nested link. And my example only has those levels, but the pop-up menu and menu items, I could just keep on going nesting them without adding new classes. So the way this version works is just having those 4 event listeners, mouse over, mouse out, focus, and blur. And they will basically do the same thing. Whenever the user, either with the mouse or with the keyboard, enters focus, we open the pop-up menu. And that's it. And when we get out, we close it. It's very simple. But now, how to go from this version, which is, yeah, it's nice, right? It works, to something that is actually worth visiting and that you really want to see. So let's see this second example. It's the same page, this time directly on garance.dev. And again, pay attention on the bottom left to see the keys that I press. So to enter, I will tab in as well. But now, if I tab again, I get into the main content directly. So I don't have to go through each individual link if I don't want to. And now I can use the down arrow key to go inside my pop-up menu. And I can just use the down arrow key, up arrow key to go through everything. And I can also navigate using letters. Like, for example, if I select the M, I get on the meadowlark, or the C, cara cara eagle. So it's really easy if I know where I want to go. And then I can jump to the second menu with the right arrow key. And again, it works exactly the same way. Arrow keys, letters, anything I want. And I get out of this menu by pressing the escape key. So how does this work? How can you reproduce it? Yeah, I call this taking advantage of the keyboard. It's basically stop thinking that you only have a tab key and think about all the other keys that exist on your keyboard and take advantage of them. So like I said, the structure is exactly the same. Well, I renamed it with accessible, but same thing. We start off with the exact same 4 event listeners, because anyway, for mouse users, nothing will change. But now, in the handle focus events, I won't do anything. I'm setting my flag to deal with my styles or whatever, but that's it. And I'm adding a new event listener on key down to listen to all the keys that are pressed and react in function of them. Now, how do I handle the key down? It's basically a giant switch. And depending on the case that happens, I will stop the propagation of the event or not. So if it's a key that I'm interested in, I won't let it bubble up to the whole browser. Otherwise, I will be, OK, I'm hands off, and I let it go. So now let's go through each case one by one. First, this one, just to get it out of the way, if you press the Enter key, we will simulate a click event and just navigate, well, let the browser navigate. I'm basically letting the browser do as much work as possible so that I don't have to deal with how to change the address in the address bar, nothing. Just simulate a link click. And then we have 4 different ways of opening a pop-up menu. So first, if you press the space key or the down arrow key like I showed you, and well, we just opened the menu and set focus to the first item. You saw that, nothing special. Another way is using the home key or the page up key. This one is interesting because, so I'm a laptop user. I don't even have a big computer at home. So those keys, I don't have them. I never see them ever. But that doesn't mean I can't take advantage of them. Because if you make a desktop app, you're going to have a bunch of users who have those keys and who are used to use them. So help them. And now another way to open the pop-up menu will be with the key up. And this way, opening it, focusing on the last item first. So this is just reproducing user affordance, right? When you go through a list, if you are at the beginning and you press up, you come back to the beginning. We're just doing the same thing in our app. And again, with the end keys and the page down key, same thing, go directly to the end. Now, other things we can do that I showed you, navigating between the top-level links with the right arrow key and the left arrow key. And I also showed you that if you press the tab key, we just close the menu, and we let the event bubble up so that we just go to wherever this tab key press is supposed to bring us. Again, I'm letting the browser decide as much as I can. And finally, if you press the escape key, same thing happens. We close the menu and hands off whatever the browser is supposed to do in that case. And now for the default, I showed you this as well. We check if it's a printable character, so if it's a letter, if it's a number, and if it is, we try to get to the menu element that starts with this letter. And if it's not, I don't do anything. I let the user deal with his own shortcuts, his own everything. So, like I said, a giant switch. This is what it looks like as a whole. You will have all the code on GitHub, so don't worry. Yeah, here you have the demo code on Garance.dev, and then all the demo code on my GitHub. I will also put it on Twitter later. So now, second example, how to make an accessible dialogue interaction. Now, this time, it's not so much about keyboard presses, but it's all about focus. Where do we have to put the focus to help the user figure out where he is? So this time, I directly have the good example. I didn't bother making it bad. So it's the same website. It's at the bottom of the page. I have this huge button. I want to receive bird images. Let's see how to do that. Again, check on the bottom left of the screen for the keys that I press. So I start right before with my keyboard focus. Now I enter the button, so I can press Enter. Here, I focus first on the first input element. And maybe I will just tab through everything, check the About Us button, what's going on there. And here, now I focus on the first paragraph, which is not a focusable element, but the button Back to Address Form is just too far down the page. And if you don't see it and you're focused on it, you will have no clue what's happening to you. So now I'm back to the main form, and I'll just leave so I can tab through and go to the Add button. Brings me to a new element again. I'm already focused on the OK. I press it. I'm back out of it, back on my regular page. So even with a complex system like this, with multiple models, multiple different interactions, the model is pretty simple. Like I said, it's all about focus. So I have a whole class dedicated to dealing with the focus. Then I have one dialog. I create a new dialog instance every time I open a new pop-up. And finally, I have a controller accessible model that has all my event listeners and that passes the focus around. So how does it work in JavaScript? Let's get this event out of the way immediately. No matter where the user is, no matter in which dialog he is, if you press the escape key, you get out. You want to always leave this possibility to your user. And then we have this method to open a new dialog. And whenever we open a new dialog, well, we give the ID to know which element we want. And we give those two extra things, focus after closed and focus first, to have our controller know what should be focused when we leave the dialog, keep that in memory, and as well, what should be focused at the time of opening the dialog. So for each of the buttons I showed, this is what it looks like. By the way, again, I'm using a click event because I'm using HTML5 buttons, so I don't have to deal with the keyboard. The browser just deals with the keyboard event itself. So when I open the main button, the first one, I just say the ID is my main dialog, and when we close this, I want to get focus back on this button that you see. And since my dialog has input in it, I don't say anything that should be focused first. The default is perfect. Now, the About Us button, I give my ID. Again, since I'm clicking on a button, when we leave this model, I want to get the focus back to this button. And I give this first paragraph as a focus. And finally, this final Add button, I give the ID, confirm dialog. I don't give any focus after closed, because when I close this, I will just fall back to the first one. I want to get the focus on I want to receive bird images. And I do say that when I open this new confirmation dialog, I want the focus on this last button. And another interesting method besides creating new dialogues is replacing them. As you can see, it works the same way. I have the new dialog, the new focus after closed, and the first focus, except I don't create a new instance. So when the user presses escape, he doesn't have to go through all the dialogues that he thought were closed, but in fact, not really. And last notes about things that are interesting to do that I won't show you code for because it's a bit messy. You can check them on GitHub. Remember to trap your focus. When the user tabs through the dialog, you don't want them to suddenly end up with the focus in somewhere completely unrelated in the background page. So remember to do that. And that's not strictly accessibility, but it's also important to remember to clean up your event listeners. So like every time we close a dialog, we have to delete all the event listeners that were associated with it. Otherwise, you don't know what could happen, and weird stuff will be triggered, and yeah, let's avoid it. So that's it for code examples. Again, you can find everything both on garance.dev and then on my GitHub. It's the same project that has both examples. And I want to finish by encouraging you to try it out. Go and experiment. Try to listen to all the keyboard keys, see how they work. Try it. Try to find new ways to navigate through your pages. And to help you try it out and see if you're doing more good or more bad, you can use a lot of tools out there. For example, Lighthouse. It's a Chrome extension. It also has an API. It has everything. You can test your project with it, integrate it to your development pipeline, anything. I think it's more known for performance, but it does have the accessibility checks. Another example is Wave, which also has either an API or a Chrome extension. This one not only tells you if you have accessibility mistakes, but it also tells you, it also gives you tips and says, oh yes, good job, you did this right. So it makes you feel good about your code. And the last example is Pally, which is also really easy to integrate in the command line with your own project. So you can just plug it in, see how it works. It doesn't have to fail your build, but try it out. That's it. Thank you very much.